Anywho, Psalm 137, and he goes, because this psalm is a remembrance of Babylon, many commentators believe it was written after the return from exile. It may also have been written many years into the exile. So that's kind of the setting of it, is the fact that the people have been exiled to Babylon. Either they've returned home or they're still in Babylon, and recounting the kind of the thoughts and experiences, I guess, of the time. So yeah, the author and date are unknown. Contains lamentations, conditions, and imprecations, as we know. So let's look at the first 3 verses of this psalm.
Longing for Zion in the foreign land, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down, yea, we wept. When we remembered Zion, we hung our harps upon the willows in the midst of it. For there those who carried us away captive asked of us a song, and those who plundered us requested mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion.
Thank you. And this song of exile puts us on the shore of one of Babylon's mighty rivers, likely the Euphrates. Judea and the whole of Israel had no mighty river comparable to the Euphrates, so it would certainly make an impression upon the forced refugees from Judea to Babylon. This could have either been like the main river, the branches, streams. It became customary for the Jews to hold their religious meetings on the banks of rivers. Mention is made of this in Acts 16:13, where we find the Jews of Philippi resorting to a riverside where prayer was wont to be made. And based on the first verse here, Horn, I can Puritan commentator maybe, suggested this cry of mourning from a repentant one. O Lord, I am an Israelite, exiled by my sin from thy holy city, and left here to mourn in this Babylon, the land of my captivity. Here I dwell in sorrow by these transient waters, musing on the restless and unstable nature of earthly pleasure. So this is the first question there is the psalm begins with the exile sitting by the what? At the rivers of Babylon.
So they like thinking, dreaming of the other rivers that they used to know and like homesick?
Well, they're certainly sad. The whole context of it, of course, is they weren't just like taken there, but of course, depending upon, well, based on what they say later on, probably the final. There was different stages of the exile from Judea to Babylon, and in the last one, everything was just like torn down and destroyed. So it would have been, a horrible thing. And so basically, it's like the idea is like them, kind of homesick, but thinking about what had happened, thinking about, maybe what God had promised, and probably thinking about, why everything happened as well would have been going through their mind as well. I think I maybe mentioned last week, maybe not, it's hard to say. I have a hard time with what I thought this morning, but about when Solomon in 2 Chronicles, after he had prayed, made a big prayer, and then God's Spirit filled the temple, and later that evening, it seemed like that, or well, I guess it would have been days later, because there was like so many days of feasting and all that. It was all great. And then God appeared to Solomon at night, and he told him, if you do what you're supposed to do, if you follow my ways, then I'll be with you, and I'll establish you, just like I did David, on and on. But then God gave like the other side of that. Is if you don't do that, if you go away from me, then all these things are going to happen. And it's pretty much what happened from then on, including the the cities being destroyed, the temple being demolished, and everybody who saw it saying like, oh boy, what happened there? It being like a watchword, I think they call it in there. So, as I look over and think about these things, I guess the thought would also have been why all those things happened, and thinking all the way back to Deuteronomy. God told him, you fall away, this stuff's going to happen. I'm bringing you this land, it's going to be great. You're going to, 100 of you are going to chase 1,000 of them, and all this sort of stuff. But if you don't follow my rules, then all these other things are going to happen. The opposite of it. It's going to be bad. It's going to be horrible.
I think he tells us that too.
Yeah.
We drop away from him, there's going to be bad thing happens.
But bad things happen when you don't too. I mean,
yeah, right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Things can get worse, So.
Yeah. Well, there's different. There's just the fact that we're in a fallen, sinful world, and there's also God's discipline to get us back into line.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And you see all through the history of Israel, where you see where, even though people are doing what's right, still, foreign armies come up on them. They try to do whatever, and they turn to God, and God helps them. And there's other times where it says that God raised up somebody because they were doing what was wrong, mm-hmm. and that constantly was trying to get them to shape up and, fly right. So God didn't have to go to the final thing here where he actually takes them out of the land and destroys everything that's there.
Like the disciples, they done everything, pretty good, but they still fell short of the torture and death. And
yeah, they all. There was, God never promises that it's going to be, no struggles, no problems. Just he'll be with us through them. And we can kind of see that here a little bit too, in verse 2, has both sorrow and a little glimmer of hope maybe in that.
So did they literally put their harps on a willow tree and not play no more? Is that what that means?
Kind of. It might be more metaphorical, just saying we hung up our harps or whatever. Kind of the idea that, they couldn't sing songs, they couldn't sing praise songs while they're in this foreign land. They couldn't sing about home and God when they're stuck in this, spot.
Okay, they weren't allowed to, or they just in the spirit to?
Not in the spirit to. The thing here says basically and we're getting ahead of a little bit here, but basically the captors wanted us. They wanted them to sing one of the songs, taunting them, mocking them, that type of a thing. But it's like they couldn't.
Thanks. I was asking that question. Thanks. Both of them had the same question.
Then again, there's willows growing by the river, probably. A lot of them.
Yeah, I guess that's actually a thing. Isaiah, I think, he called it the brook or the river of willows. So lots of willows were plentiful in Babylon. A great quantity of them that were on the banks of the Euphrates caused Isaiah in Isaiah 15:7 to call it the brook or the river of willows. So yeah, it was maybe a tree that wasn't so common in Israel. Israel wasn't great for trees.
They can only survive. They can't only, but back then they had to have water, a lot of water.
Yeah.
So.
Yep. And it says there, it goes, there we sat, yea, we wept. The immense rivers of Babylon said to the exiled one, you're not home anymore. See, as they remembered Zion, they wept. They wept over the death of so many loved ones. They wept over the loss of almost everything they owned. They wept over the destroyed city of Jerusalem, of her great temple.
They talk about Zion as Israel.
As Jerusalem, yeah.
Jerusalem
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. As the everything, every reason you could think of to cry, they would have, had reason to cry over. As everything that they knew before was gone. And part of course, that problem was that they thought that because that was where God put his name, that's where the temple was, that's where God's chosen people were, the throne of David and all this sort of stuff. They thought that because of that, it didn't matter what they did, that God was going to, maintain it. But they found out that, God wasn't going to do that. We should never, like, kind of, well, not really put God to the test, I guess. We'd say, oh, yeah, God said he's going to do this, so I'll just go ahead and do whatever I want because God's still going to do this for me. God, yeah, we shouldn't assume on what God's going to do or not do based on what we think about things. We should just listen to what God says. And again, God gave them warning after warning after warning. And even says that at the beginning, or the end, I think, of 2 Kings, or the end of, probably in the 2 Kings, mentions about how that, they were taken away, and it's like they had all these prophets that came and told them all these warnings all this time, and yet they wouldn't listen, so finally they got taken away. So, question 2 there. The exiles wept when they remembered what? Zion. And then they hung our harps upon the willows. The singer used poetic liberty to present a striking scene. And we mentioned about those large willow trees. And that, I guess, Ezra 2:41 mentions there were many singers who carried captives. They would, of course, take their instruments with them, I guess, if they could. This will be noticed that although the exiles were unable to sing the songs of Zion in Babylon, they nevertheless did not break their harps in pieces or throw them in the stream. Instead, they hung them by the poplars, presumably saving them for what would surely be a better day. So said James Montgomery Boyce, pointing out that even though they hung their harps, they didn't abandon them or destroy them or just chuck them away. They just kind of hung them up to be used, hopefully, at a better time. So that's number 3. The exiles hung their what? Their harps. And I guess there's maybe different words there, but harps. Mine has a lyre, and some sort of stringed instrument, I guess, of some sort would be the case. And this is that part we're asking about there. Sing us one of the songs of Zion. This was the cruel demand of those who carried us away captive. They asked for one of the famous songs of Zion. The ones who plundered the people of God now wanted them to entertain them. Yet there was no song left in them. Their harps had been hung in the trees. And I guess that the word there that is saying where they had mine has tormentors, I guess, as opposed to plunderers, pointing out that the plundering had already been done, but now it was more like mocking and just mocking them, making it even worse as they were going on their way. He goes, they did not sing, and as the following lines will show, they could not sing.
Think God was keeping them from singing?
Well, I think just the sadness is keeping them from singing. It's like.
It's all bummed out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fresh.
Be like, like any kind of sad thing that happens, and it's like, hey, don't be sad. Sing a happy song, especially a happy song about the place that has been destroyed. It's worse even than just trying to sing in that time. We do 4 already?
No.
Man, got Zion a lot. So, the captors asked the exiles to sing one of the songs of Zion, right? One of the songs of the city, of Jerusalem, of the temple, no doubt. So let's look now at verses 4 through 6. A vow to remember Jerusalem even in exile.
How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. If I do not remember you, let my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth. If I do not exalt Jerusalem above my chef joy.
Thank you. And so this is the thing, they were requested him to sing, but there's how can we? It says, though their conquerors wanted them to sing for their amusement, the song simply wasn't there. The song of God's people were more than performances. They came from their relationship with God. It would take a long time to sing those songs in a foreign land. Let's see. Question 5 there. The psalmist questions, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? And F.B. Meyer took the idea of not being able to sing and used it as an admonition for Christians. He says, you have ceased singing lately. The joy of your religious life has vanished. You pass through the old routine, but without the exhilaration of former days. Can you not tell the reason? It is not because your circumstances are depressed, though they may be, for Paul and Silas sang praise to God even in their prison. Is it not disobedience at the root of your songlessness? You have allowed some rift to come within the lute of your life, which has been slowly widening and now threatens to silence all, and you will never be able to resume that song until you have put away the evil you are doing and have returned from the land of the enemy. And there's kind of that idea too, it's one thing if to have some bad thing come about, because bad things are going to come about, and just because we're in a fallen world and we know that God will see us through it. It's another thing to recognize the fact that you're under divine judgment and that God is punishing you because of the things that you've done. And surely, just like hindsight being 2020 and all the people who'd survived all of this would have looked back at what all the prophets had said, back all the way to Moses up into the more recent ones, and known that it wasn't without cause that they got carried away like they did. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, the singer vowed that he would never forget God's holy city, and even gave a curse upon himself if he did. If he did forget, then his right hand could lose its skill to play the harp. If he failed to remember, then his tongue would lose its ability to sing. There's also this idea, I guess, of the right hand being integrity in that, and it would be a sign that he'd lost his integrity if he were to just forget Jerusalem and forget what was before and just embrace the new life that they were being taken away to. And of course we know that, we see starting off in the book of Daniel about how Daniel and his friends, even though they were in this new land, they didn't just give themselves over to live like they were supposed to, or being told to live in that land. They said, we want to try to honor God still, if we can. And so they, because of their nature, I think, because of the way that they approach things, God gave them favor in the eyes of the people over them, the master of the eunuchs or whatever, and just the whole time, God was with them and God was with the people there. But they didn't forget. They didn't just turn around and say, okay, well, we're Babylonian now, I guess, so let's just, win in Rome type of a thing. Just act like the Romans. They didn't want to forget where they'd come from, what God had promised them, the things that God had done for them. And I guess, the Puritan commentator John Trapp observed when he was alive, back in 1600s, that the Jews then, when they would build a house, they would leave like one room unfinished. And it was to remember that Jerusalem and the temple were, the temple was desolate, and Jerusalem in part probably desolate at that time. And of course, even now, even though Israel en masse is kind of back in Jerusalem and back in the promised land, still the temple is not there. And so it's like a way to remember the fact that they don't have what they'd lost, I guess. Remember what they'd lost. Question 6, the psalmist vows, if I forget you, O Jerusalem. Right. If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand forget its skill. And if the psalmist does not remember Jerusalem, in question 7, he asks that his what? Tongue cling to the roof of his mouth. And of course, in some ways, you can see whenever they got the go-ahead to go back to Jerusalem, it wasn't like everybody did go back. Some people end up did like kind of becoming acclimated and had a good enough life in Babylon in captivity that they didn't want to go back to Jerusalem, because they were going back to desolation and a lot of hard work and a lot of enemies all around them, and they could have stayed where they now made a life after all that time. But now we get to the next. Well, I guess we're kind of in the next section, the conditions. We get to the imprecations. Sorry. Imprecations, remember that's kind of songs asking God to deal justice out on the enemies, on those that are doing wrong. So let's look first at verse 7 here.
Remember, O Lord, against the sons of Edom, the day of Jerusalem, who said, raise it to its very foundation.
Thank you. So the psalmist directed his words to God, asking him to remember the people of Edom for their conduct during the conquest of Jerusalem. In this case, the call to remember was a call to oppose and to judge. Now we, if you remember, we went through the book of Obadiah in some sermons, and the book of Obadiah was all about, and probably about mostly this time that this psalm is talking about how whenever Babylon came in and they conquered, that people were trying to flee, like the Edomites were flagging them down. They were trying to stop them. They were arresting them or bringing them back to the Babylonians. Not good. And I guess it appears from various other sources in Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, and Obadiah that the Idumeans, aka the Edomites, joined the army of Nebuchadnezzar against their brethren the Jews, and they were the main instruments in raising the walls of Jerusalem even to the ground. And as I said, as you look at that book, the book of Obadiah, which is all about a prophetic pronouncement against the Edomites, or the Edomites, that they, even though that God's judgment was being meted out on Jerusalem and on the people, that you don't want to be ones speaking out of turn and joining in and going against God's people, because I think the promise that God made to Abraham about blessings and curses, if you bless them, they'll be blessed, and if you curse them, they'll be cursed. I think that still holds true, and we need to, even as they're being judged, still, mentioned praying for Israel, praying for Israel's peace, and of course, ultimately that they will turn back to God, as they should, as we all should. Obadiah 1:12 says, "Nor should you have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor should you have spoken proudly in the day of distress." And of course, the Edom, they were the descendants of the son of Esau, which was Isaac's other son. He had Jacob and he had Esau. He had Esau, then he had Jacob, although it was neck and neck, so to speak. And Jacob became the child of the covenant, and God established his covenant through him. But Esau, even though he had despised the covenant, despised the blessing and all that, God still provided for him, made him a great nation and all that. But there was this enmity always between those two. Even after the two brothers made up, Jacob was still a little iffy about whether or not to trust him. But the people, they were still right. Whenever the Israelites came out of Egypt, the Edomites wouldn't let them go through their land. They were not happy with them. Same way with Ammonites and the otherites, the descendants of Lot. Anywho, so question 8. The psalmist calls on the Lord to remember the sons of who? Edom. Sons of Edom, for their actions against Jerusalem. He said, raise it to its very foundation. The Edomites were a sister nation to Israel, having descended from Esau, brother of Jacob, aka Israel. They should have supported and sympathized with Jerusalem when the Babylonians came against it and said they enjoyed Jerusalem's agony and wanted the city to be completely destroyed. That was the thing too. God had told Israel not to attack the Edomites when they came through, as well as the Ammonites and the whateverites. Something with an M. I think.
Can't help you there.
Yeah. The word foundations here implies more than the actual foundations of the walls of Jerusalem. It also pertains to the God-established order in creation, in his rule, and in his election of a people for himself. The Edomites were hoping for the destruction of the foundation of Yahweh's rule on earth. It says Vangerin. It's horrible for neighbors to be enemies, worse for them to show their enmity in times of great affliction. Worst of all, for neighbors to egg others on to malicious deeds, so said Spurgeon. I would say even worse, as Obadiah points out, to be your brothers, to be your family. So question 9, the sons of Edom said, raise it to its very foundation. Thank you. And then the last two verses here, talking about Babylon, the people themselves who are carrying them away. Someone like to read verses 8 and 9, please.
Daughter of Babylon, doomed to destruction. Happy is he who repays you. He who seizes your infants and dashes them against the rocks.
Yep, pretty rough. So, daughter of Babylon, you or who are to be destroyed. The psalmist directed the words to future generations of the Babylonian Empire, giving them notice that they themselves would be destroyed in God's judgment. And he points out that it's interesting that the psalmist did not make this a prayer to God as he did about the Edomites. So he didn't say, God, please, visit the judgment upon the Babylonians. And it could be because he knew that there already were prophecies saying what would happen to the Babylonians because of what they did. And maybe the...
Well, they're talking about little ones. They're talking about children?
Yeah.
So kill them?
Yep. They would...
The children will also be dashed to pieces before their eyes.
Yep.
It's on Isaiah
Exactly.
13:16.
Yeah, there was already, like I said, judgments and prophecies even before they got taken away, that even though they're going to take it away that way, that they would be judged. And part of it here is the fact that they would be repaid as you served us. So what would be done to the Babylonians would be in keeping with the same thing that they did to the Israelites. So they came in,
Just the girls?
What's that?
Just the women? Just the female babies? Or it says daughters?
I think it's just kind of saying future generations, daughters of Zion. Everybody in everybody in Babylon would be sad because of what would happen, or they're, not even sad. It's basically you guys are going to be destroyed. You're gonna get the justice, or the same type of thing that you laid out is going to be done to you. And because there is ample evidence that to dash in the pieces their little ones was a common enough sequel to a heathen victory, and that Babylon had been in no mood for restraint at the fall of Jerusalem. And so real quick, it's 2 Kings 25:7.
What was it, the first one?
2 Kings
Second King.
25:7. So pretty much there at the end of 2 Kings, the fall of that. If you want to.
Then they killed the sons of Zebediah before his eyes,
Yeah.
put out the eyes of Zebediah, bound him with bronze fetters, and took him to Babylon.
Yep.
What was that one?
25:7. 2 King.
Yep. as Zedekiah, but they gave him some different
Is
names.
that the name of it?
Possibly.
Zedekiah?
There was a lot of stuff there, and again, it was crazy how many kind of chances they got. Where basically Jehoiakim was in Judah; he reigned. At that time, the servants of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came up to Jerusalem, and the city was besieged. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to the city while his servants were besieging it. And basically, the king gave himself up, and they carried him off. And they carried off all this stuff. And you're supposed to be, okay, now you guys are going to be under us. And then they put Zedekiah became king. He reigned 11 years, and he rebelled against the king of Babylon. And then they came in, and that's when they killed all of his sons in front of him and put out his eyes and carried him off into captivity and all this. So anyhow, the Babylonians were not happy with Israel, and by the time they actually came and razed everything and took everything away. So this awful thing about the dashing the little ones is understood in the light of the previous line. No doubt the singer had seen this done to the little ones of Israel. And whoops. And so, question 10. The psalm pronounces a blessing on the ones who dashes Babylon's little ones against the rock. Yep, and that would, of course, be the who was it? Came in eventually? Persians. The Medes and the Persians, they came in and conquered Babylon eventually.
I thought Babylon would be Iran now. I thought Iran was Persia, basically, but evidently not. That's it says Persia come in and
Yeah, well, I think it was the Medes and the Persians. I'm not sure where exactly they came from, but keep in mind there's a lot of area there, so Babylon might have been like a part of it, and they might have been another part of it, and yeah. Of course, at the time Babylon was like the greatest nation, greatest Gentile world kingdom, as evidenced by the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw, right, with the head of gold, and then it was the arms and chest of silver, and then bronze, I think, and then iron and clay at the end, signifying these different world kingdoms that would come about. But because of what they had done to Israel in carrying out God's judgment, the way that they carried it out, I guess you could say, is kind of what's going to happen to them and what happened to them in the end. It's kind of crazy. I was reading,
So in that statue, where are we at in time now?
well, now we're after the Roman Empire, of course.
Which was
The actual Romans.
iron, though?
Yeah, that was iron, I believe. And then the next is going to be the iron and the clay mixed together. So it's going to be a mixture. It's not going to be a lot stable. And of course, everything got like less and less valuable and less, good as it went down. So it's going to be not a great thing. So yeah, we're kind of in this in-between period, waiting for that. But anyhow, I was reading today about what's his name? There was Asa and then his son, and I had him mixed up with a different king altogether. But Jehoram. Yeah, he was. He became the king, and he had a bunch of different brothers, and he immediately had them all killed. And then he had a horrible death because of the way that he did. And it's great, the verse about him dying, it says, "And he departed with no one's regret." Nobody cared. Yeah, I was thinking that. I want that put on my tombstone. And he departed, no one's regret. But yeah, it's kind of the same, like, as the way that he lived. Even though he was made king, he like went and like viciously like killed all of his brothers and other officials to make sure that nobody would like challenge him as king. And so God wasn't happy with that. And I think the same way with the Babylonians. You can see how Daniel in Babylon worked, and about how that Nebuchadnezzar kind of became to be like a believer in God. In a way, we don't know to what extent, did he actually fully trust in God, or was it kind of he recognized but just thought that God was like the best.
Is that the one that turned into an animal like grass and on growing hair?
Yeah. God had done all these things, right? And it seemed like he kept on having these instances where he turned back, like after he threw Daniel's friends into the fiery furnace and they survived. And then it's like, it's like, let there be, there worship no other God except for that one. I may be confusing that with one of those versions. But, anywho. But yeah, then, he had this vision about what might happen. Daniel told him this dream, and then he was good for about a year or so, and then he's walking around and saying, boy, look at this place. I've done pretty good. I've made everything great. And all of a sudden, next thing he knows, he's out in the field eating grass. But then God brought him back in the end. And that's a thing, too, to think about, the fact that even though, this is a very sad psalm, it still is not like the end of the story. It wasn't the end of Israel. God still maintained them through people like Daniel and his friends and those in captivity, and then brought them back to the land so that they could rebuild the temple. And we know, of course, all the promises God made to them when they were there about that. And then even after that, though, then, of course, they rejected Jesus. And then, once again, the Romans then ended up in 70 A.D. coming in, razing the place and tearing the temple down, and, all the stuff that happened. That, once again, it's almost,
I'm hoping that the king got turned back to a real person instead of being all feathered and all that.
Oh, he did, yeah. God brought him back.
He woke up.
Yeah, he got his mind back to him, and he came back, and he, came in and got his nails trimmed and a haircut and cleaned up. And
Blacked out.
Yeah, just like that. What am I doing? Spit that out.
a whole year of roughage like that. It's pretty crazy.
That was after that when he released Daniel and all of them, right?
No.
He released Daniel before he went nuts or whatever?
No, that was... He ended up, of course, dying like his son or his grandson was, like, king of Babylon later on. That's when, like, I think it was his... I don't think it was his son. I think it was his grandson. But it might be just one of his descendants who was king. Took the stuff from the temple that they had, like, sacked. They'd carried away, like, during this time. We'd read about in the Psalm. They carried it away, and he said, hey, get that good stuff out. Get the good, cups and stuff out that we got from Israel. And they started, doing things, and that's when the fingers appeared on the wall, and like mine, tinkle, tinkle,
But
mine,
still,
something like that.
That happened to him after Daniel was in the lion's den, not before.
No, that's a different king.
Oh, okay.
Or a different ruler. As I was saying, that was, I believe, that's
okay.
One of
Gotcha.
the Medes or the Persians.
Okay.
When they were over Babylon at that point is when they did the thing. Because David rose to like one of the third highest, like almost immediately. And that's when the other one's like jealous of him and that. So, there's a lot of things. Like that very night, I think, after the whole... Because they... It's so funny. They brought Daniel in, and he goes, I'm going to give you everything, up to half the kingdom and all that. And he's like, save it. I know what's coming. You ain't giving nobody nothing. And he goes, you've been weighed and found wanting. And,
Next day, or that night, they killed him.
I think that night, that's when they came in. And, yeah, and they did the stuff that was prophesied to happen that it mentions in this psalm. So anyhow, any questions about this psalm? It's kind of a